And can a 21st century autopsy solve the riddle of a 2,000-year-old cold case?
These wounds would have left him in agony, but none of them were fatal.
This looks more like torture.
County Offaly, Ireland. Workers repairing a water drain in an industrial peat bog make a grim discovery. The mutilated remains of a man.
It's a gruesome sight. It's just the torso with no head. And the skin is dark and tanned and leathery.
Seriously, it is something straight out of a horror movie.
What could explain such a macabre death?
Now, cutting-edge forensic science may finally uncover the identity of the body in the bog and reveal the shocking truth about his gruesome death. The head and the lower half of the body are missing, but the skin appears in near-perfect condition. On-site workers wonder if they've just discovered a modern murder.
The police are called, and they try to identify this victim. Of course, without a head, they don't have any dental records.
They search the body for clues to the man's identity. Their attention is drawn to his remarkable hands.
The hands are in very good condition. The fingers are incredibly detailed, and you can even see the whorl patterns on the fingerprints.
The pristine hands suggest the man may have died recently, but the state of his skeleton is very different.
The soft tissue is incredibly well preserved, but what happened to the bones? It's like they've been squashed flat.
You know, what could do this?
To explain the strange state of the bones, they consider whether the bog itself could be responsible.
Bog moss produces a compound called sphagnum, which actually leaches the calcium out of the bones. The process makes them bendy and kind of squishy, and then the weight of the bog can bend them out of shape.
The leaching process explains why the man's torso has been pressed flat. It also rules out one line of investigation.
The process of demineralization takes hundreds of years, so this body isn't a recent murder victim.
To find out exactly how old the body really is, they send a tissue sample for radiocarbon dating and get an astonishing result.
Radiocarbon dating of these remains puts the body earlier than 2,000 years ago, which would have been at about the height of the Celtic Iron Age.
The Iron Age victim is named Old Crocken Man, after the location of the bog where he was buried. The bog also appears responsible for his remarkable preservation after 2 millennia.
The cold, acidic, oxygen-free environment of the bog is actually perfect for preventing decay and will mummify the human flesh.
But how did Old Crocken Man die over 2,000 years ago? A 21st century autopsy reveals ancient evidence.
There's a wound on the upper left arm, which could be a defense wound, and they tend to occur when somebody's trying to defend themselves against a weapon like this.
The arm injury could be from a blow sustained in battle. But other bizarre clues suggest something more unsettling.
His nipples have been sliced open. They've been mutilated.
Holes were cut in his upper arms through which hazel ropes were passed, probably in order to restrain him.
All of these wounds would have left him in agony, and they were brutal, but none of them were fatal.
This looks more like torture.
A 2,000-year-old body unearthed in an Irish peat bog is revealing grisly injuries that are clear evidence of torture. Now, experts believe they've found what finally killed the man.
There's a deep stab wound to the chest, probably caused by a sword or a dagger, and it's this which is the fatal blow.
The facts are now clear. This man was tortured and then murdered.
But it didn't end there. After he died, he was decapitated and then cut in half.
This extraordinary level of violence is far more than necessary to kill a man. The team now suspect that this is not simply a case of ancient murder.
We need to draw a distinction here within the evidence because while this torture would have been agonizing and brutal, it doesn't seem to be mindless. The intent is to inflict pain, and something that would be much more ritualistic or ceremonial.
It's pretty clear that old Kraken Man was ritualistically murdered.
The question is, why? The key to cracking the mystery could be determining who old Kraken Man really was.
The proportions of the torso tell us that he was a young man, around 25 years of age, and the size tells us he was quite powerfully built and about 5'11".
Iron Age Ireland was essentially rural and agricultural, so we might consider, for example, was this powerfully built young man a farmer?
An examination of his hands casts doubt on the theory.
Because the hands are so well preserved, we can see that the nails are relatively well manicured, and there's no calluses.
His hands had not seen a day's hard work, and that would have been really unusual in Iron Age society.
Could his diet shed light on his identity? To find out, isotopic analysis is used on his fingernails.
Based on the nitrogen levels in the analysis, we can say that he had a meat-rich diet for at least 4 months before he died.
Meat is essentially a luxury item even back then. This indicates that this man likely had high wealth or high status.
But another find suggests he was even more important.
He was wearing a leather band on his upper arm, and there was a design on the band that represented the sun. And this is a symbol that in the Celtic Iron Age was very closely associated with kingship.
The well-manicured nails, the callus-free hands, the meat-rich diet, and now kingly jewelry all adds up to old Kraken Man being Irish royalty, maybe even a king.
It's a compelling theory, made stronger by the evidence of old Kraken Man's lacerated nipples.
In Ireland during the Iron Age, the king's chest, and his nipples included, were a symbol of his power and his prowess.
Slicing off or cutting the nipples would be a devastating loss of power. It would mean that you were no longer king.
But what could the king have done to deserve such a terrible fate?
Iron Age Celtic culture were effectively chiefly societies, which means that the chief or the king were responsible for the maintenance and sustenance of the community. If something goes wrong, the king is held responsible.
And kings were severely punished when things didn't go to plan.
If a society or community is suffering tremendously at this time, it's very possible that they might ritualistically murder the king and remove him permanently from office.
The evidence points to old Kraken Man being ritually murdered for failing his tribe.
During the early Iron Age, there was this dramatic shift to a wetter, colder environment where rainfall increased and the weather cooled.
For Iron Age people, it was likely a disaster, leaving the harvest in ruins and potentially starving the people.
For the king, this natural disaster would have spelled the end of his reign.
Old Kraken Man may have been seen to have failed as a king because the climate destroyed the harvest.
His people had no choice but to sacrifice their failed king in order to appease the gods and anoint a new leader.
The inauguration of a new king would have been seen like a wedding celebration, the king being wedded to the goddess of the earth. And so the burial of the former king, the one who had been sacrificed, would have been seen as almost an offering to the blessings of this new union.
Modern forensic science has solved a 2,000-year-old mystery to show how climate catastrophe may have driven an Iron Age tribe to ritually murder their king, then ceremoniously place him in the bog.
What initially appeared to just be a body thrown in a bog turns out to very likely have been an Irish king who paid the ultimate price by not being able to sustain his society.